Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's 8 o'clock, and I know you're here with family. It's time to talk. Again, I'd like to thank Calzura for being just a great shoe, being on the market for everybody to treat their feet. And just please, if you haven't tried them out yet, definitely use the code Time to Talk. Get your discount. Try them for yourself. The only shoe on the market that can be thermally disinfected and sterilized. You can send it through your washer. You can put it in the sterilizer. And guess what? There's even an IFU on one source for it. Do not hesitate. Please use Time to Talk. Get your discount, $17.99 off, and get your pair today. Hey, family, we're here. Um, hey, Tammy, how you doing? I just wanted to reach out and ask a question for you. Who is in your village? I know I said it in when I was announcing what we were going to be talking about, but I wanted just to ask you, who makes your SBD the well-oiled machine that it can be? I know you have your C-suite, you have the support from biomed, you have the support from facilities, you have support from all of these people that will do their part to make sure that you're operating effectively. I wanted to focus in on one particular group of people tonight, and that's infection prevention. Yes, infection prevention. I want you to understand what is the role of infection prevention when they're coming into your department and they're doing their assessments and walking around and they're looking for whatever they're looking for. It is not to, say that you're doing anything wrong. I want you to understand that they are there to help you. So I invited an infection preventionist here tonight to talk to us about what does that look like. I have Miss Stephanie Carraway coming in to just talk to us a little bit about that process. I also invited Tiffany Darville so she could tell you from her standpoint what she's dealt with when it comes to dealing with infection control, dealing with facilities, dealing with all of these other entities, just to make sure that we're in a position where we can be the best SBD that we can be. So, Stephanie, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I am great. Tiffany, how are you? Welcome. I thank you both for being here tonight.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Well,
I'm so
thank
happy
you.
to be here.
I guess the burning question on everybody's mind, and I guess it looks from a standpoint of, hey, what does infection control do for sterile processing? So I looked into something and I saw it said that the primary role of infection control and sterile processing is to establish policies, procedures, and practices to reduce the risk of transmission of microbial pathogens causing diseases with the goal of protecting patients and staff members. So I let that resonate with me for a second and I said, oh, okay, when they come in, they actually have a specific set of things that they're looking for. So, Stephanie, from your standpoint, when you walk into a department, matter of fact, let me back up a second. Stephanie, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself so they know where you're coming from the knowledge that you're going to present to them?
Sure. I currently work as an infection preventionist, the manager at a cancer center in Tampa, Florida. I have been an infection preventionist for about 12 years now. And I guess my role really I took a big dive into SPD when we did have some findings at our hospital. And we realized the importance and the partnership that we needed to develop in order to make the improvements for our patients, for our staff, and for our surveys.
Okay.
So pretty good.
Okay. So, Tiffany, before I get to the questions, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been in SPD for about 6 years. I got into SPD because my brother had a surgical site infection. So it made me curious to see why and what was the reason it happened. So when I dove into SPD, it made me be more educated to find out the reason why, or, was the instruments infected? Did they contaminate the field? So my brother actually got me into it to where I can prevent that from happening to other individuals as well.
So, family, as you can see, what we have is an infection preventist, and we have somebody who got into sterile processing because of a surgical site infection. So we're going to be coming at this from two different sides. So as I jumped into the actual meat of infection prevention. So, Stephanie, when you walk into an SPD, what is it that you're, I won't say looking for, what are you assessing when you go in?
So there's a lot of different things we look at. Our main focus is to ensure that things are done the way they should be done, as far as packaging instruments, that they're going through the washers the way they should be, completely opened on clamps, on stringers when they're going through the washer. We always look for pitting in instruments. Scopes is always a hot topic for Joint Commission.
Yes.
I don't know if you know, but our infection control chapter in Joint Commission actually has a lot to do with SPD. So our chapter has a lot of things that apply directly to what the SPD staff do. So if there are findings in SPD, typically it goes in the infection control chapter. And that's how your hospital is cited.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, so you just threw me for a loop right there. So I'm going to be with the people on this one. So infection control actually knows about the instruments supposed to be open. They know about pitting. You know about how to wrap and all of these. So y'all actually are well versed in what we are truly supposed to be doing.
I hope that your infection preventionists are. I will say, I didn't really dive into it until 2015 when we had a finding and we realized we needed to focus a little more on SPD and build that partnership, because there was a real big disconnect between the two departments and we didn't have any collaboration. And it's really important. Our team sits on our value analysis committee. So any new items that come in, our team is boots on the ground for clinics. We have over 16 clinics at my hospital. And sometimes we're in areas and we find new pieces of equipment that SPD might know nothing that it even exists in the hospital. And we'll say, wow, following the Spalding classification, this really should be going to SPD. It shouldn't just be getting wiped down. So we identify other things in the hospital that do need to be reprocessed by SPD.
Okay. So Tiffany, hearing that they know about wrapping, they know about the washers, they know about pitting, they know about pretty much everything that we do. Have you seen that kind of involvement from your infection, that amount of, I guess, I won't say hands-on, but that amount of know-how, that knowledge base come through your facility?
I mean, I would say it's kind of like a 50-50, because mainly they're looking at what's wrong, or not as where, okay, well, you're wrapping, in a certain way, or we see this. I haven't seen that actually been displayed in SPD in my experience, but I have seen, where they'll do a correction and they'll say, well, the ranges are between this and this. So they're actually knowledgeable of it. But some of them just come and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And I'm like, okay. And then when we try to explain to them the standards, they're like, what? They kind of lost a little bit. So it's kind of like a disconnect between what they know and then what they look for. But some are knowledgeable, but it's a 50-50, to me on, the technician side from what I've seen.
So I would say from the leadership and me taking pride in being SPD, and I say, hey, I have all these certifications that you don't have. So how do you know what I'm doing is correct? How do you approach that when it comes to you like that, Stephanie?
So I'm probably not the normal IP. I really like SPD. So I have been at the sink reprocessing because I want to learn what it's like to sweat in full PPE and know how hard it is. So I have actually reprocessed GI scopes. I have cleaned instruments. I want to know that I know what I'm doing before I talk to other people about it, which I'm not, that is not the industry standard for infection preventionists, but I feel like that's the only way to communicate with them so they know you're actually trying to learn. So I developed the relationship a little differently than most IPs, but I think that's the way to do it. And I would challenge your IPs to, come in one day and look at how we actually reprocess the scopes, put some PPE on, try to do one like as a practice run before we actually do it, so that they can see how difficult it is, I mean, I don't think anyone really knows how long a GI scope is and how you
Right.
have to put the brushes in without pulling it out of the water.
Right.
So I'm more of a hands-on, but I did get certified in scopes from reprocessing. But yeah, you're right, Tiffany. You don't see that. It is very what you're doing wrong, and I really hope that infection preventionists will change that mindset and learn more and be more hands-on with the staff, because the relationships that we've developed at our hospital are so collaborative, and I can count on them and they can count on me.
And just saying that, I see that, yeah, you do take a different approach than most of the IP people that I've come into contact with. And we're going to step away from you doing it, but how do you say, Tammy said, do you want to move to Fort Myers? When it says so infection prevention is responsible for writing certain policies and procedures and things of that nature. Coming up against somebody who, again, well-versed in SPD, certified all the way to the 9 in SPD, you're coming in from an infection control side and saying, hey, this policy is now what you have to implement. And as Tiff said, so I follow Amy standards that says I do it this way. You give me a policy to say I do it this way. How do we merge those two things together?
So I would say they should be working together to do the policies. Typically, we don't write our policies without SPD present. So if there's a policy, I know one in particular that it's under the infection control chapter is reprocessing of endoscopes, which it's funny, it's under our chapter, but it's what SPD does.
Yes.
Right.
We actually do sit with them and work with them to write it. We follow, ST guidelines, AMI guidelines. We look through everything with them, and then they get final say as well. So we'll send it to them for review and get their feedback. So it has to be an open relationship where you both are involved, because if it's just one side, then you're not going to get the whole picture.
Right.
And you guys are the ones who have all the knowledge, right? I mean, we are experts in infection prevention. You are experts in SPD. So it's essential that you do it together. So we do have a lot of policies that are under our chapter because of, the Joint Commission stuff. But if you look at who's involved and what parties are the people on the policy, it will say SPD and infection control and whoever else is involved.
So Tiffany, from a standpoint of that, you get brought this new, hey, infection control say we should be doing ABC. And you're looking at it like, that's not what we do. That's not how this works. What is your next steps? If you're building that relationship, do you have the say-so or the wherewithal to say, hey, let me call in the infection control and let's talk about this together? If they're not, like I said, building, like she said, where y'all get to sit down and write that together and make it from both sides.
So I feel to kind of bridge that gap is you kind of see, do we have an infection, or is there constant infections with this device or this instrumentation or this tray? So it's kind of like you're taking their suggestions on their findings, and then you go and you say, okay, well, let's get the clinical educator involved, and let's get key people involved to where, okay, let's look over it, and even including the director as well, the SPD, and say, hey, because you need that support behind to involve the actual staff for them to understand the importance and the essential policies that's written to prevent infection. But the issue is that if it's not presented in real time, to where at the end of the day, if I got this tray going and I got to do this scope and SPD and decon is backed up, I need to know in real time to make it simpler to understand that these are the policies, but how are we going to integrate it into the flow of SPD? Because we know how SPD can get thick, SPD can get overwhelming, but with those policies and procedures, it's like, hey, IP is trying to help us. So we have to come as SPD to integrate them together and get, all on one accord for us to say, okay, for us to integrate this, let's do little trials, or let's see, okay, let's do it this way and see if it'll work with this, or just to see if we can do it with this, to kind of figure out, because sometimes if you just shove it all at once, some people are resistant because it's so much to absorb at once. I mean, you got to give people a chance to understand the standards, understand education. Because some people have never done it that way. They'd be like, well, I've done it this way. And it's like, no, that could cause an infection. So, we got to kind of do it softly to them to kind of guide them in. Not saying that they're not going to be receptive, but it's just that it's really a team effort in SPD, like the director, the clinical educator, having competencies on the new policies. So then you can see, okay, be an improvement in this, or some people are advanced. So unless you actually take the time to do like competencies and speak with them and present it to them in a certain way, people are more, kind of hands off with IP. When it comes to policies, they feel like, oh man, another policy, oh man, something else I have to learn. And then sometimes it's like, no offense, it's forced down our throat because, okay, this is Joint Commission, this is infection control, and you have to do it. But it's not explained why we need to change.
Okay. So I'm just being devil's advocate. IP walks in, they just happen to peek in your decon, and somebody's not in full PPE doing something, and per policy, since she knows, hey, again, she's here to help staff and patients. I think that's the part that people leave out. Their job is to keep infections and diseases from staff and patients. So they witness somebody not in full PPE, or they witness somebody not doing the hand hygiene. Mm-hmm. All of these things are infection control. So then she goes back and says, hey, per policy, you're supposed to be, donning A, B, C, D, E all the way down. How can you dispute that? If that's the fact, is it just because it's coming from infection control, or how? I mean, like, so if you're trying to build that teamwork and she's just observing and this is what they observed,
right? Now,
how do you explain that to staff now? Like, she didn't do anything wrong. They walked in from an IP doing their rounds, and hey, the assessment said, hey, you said they're not in the proper PPE. Like, that's an observation, right? That's not her like overstepping. That's an observation.
I will say that we have worked really hard on our approaches. I think some people don't have the best approach with SPD, and really, I think some IPs don't really have the best approach with staff in general. So we try to make it light, and we're like, come on, what's going on? Come on, a PPE today? I'm like, really? So we like try to make it light and like fun. And I think the approach is a lot to do with, you have some of the other generation of IPs who are like, I told you to put your gown, you know what I mean? So it's like that, right. The way you go into it is really, really important from our standpoint.
And is that something that from your assessments that y'all are looking for when y'all go into places? Like, were they in the right PPE? Was this being followed? Like, how would you know if the instruments weren't open in the washer? How do y'all go about doing an assessment of that nature?
Typically we walk through. We go into decon and we look, and we'll go into the washer side and we'll take a peek at it. And sometimes I'll walk with the educator just so we can do it together. So I'll walk with her and, show her what I'm finding, and then we'll kind of address it together sometimes. I think that helps because it's like their team member and our team member, working together. So yeah, when we're rounding is typically, that's what we do. I mean, we look for those things because it's better if we find it than a surveyor to find it. And obviously we want to keep your patients and staff safe. So I think sometimes it just takes a little bit of extra reminding from us to get you, where you need to be for surveys. And actually there's a few studies that were done. There was one presented at FAPIC about Cedar Mount Sinai's hospital saying that IP, once they collaborated with SPD, their audits, and it was over several years, their audits went from 64% to 84%. So their audits actually improved with the collaboration between the two departments.
I saw a comment just now that said they hate it when people use the excuse that it's Joint Commission. Why not use the same standard that the reason Joint and Amy have it as a standard and speak to the why? Like, don't say, oh, because it's Joint Commission, because everybody uses that when it's around that time. People use it as the number one excuse. Hey, we're doing this because we're in a Joint Commission window. Why not? That's because it's the standard. Why can't we get people there?
Yeah. Yeah. I always actually use the opposite. I'll say, it came through the washer completely clamped. Now, would you use this instrument on your mom upstairs? And sometimes they're like, and I'm like, I would, I'm here and you're here. We're both here for the patients, and we really want to make it as safe as possible for the patients. And then for you guys too. I don't want you walking home with some kind of weird, organism that got on your skin because you weren't wearing PPE. That's the last thing we want. But, I try to look at it that way. I think people underestimate the importance of SPD staff. Our quality metrics one of them is surgical site infections. I can't get to 0 without an SPDT member. I can't have 0 surgical site infections without you guys working as hard as you do to make sure my instruments that get to my surgeons are perfect. And that's what you guys do for us.
Okay. You mentioned surgical site infections, and we know Tiffany's story. So we're gonna get into that right after commercial. We're gonna come back and we're gonna finish that topic of the why. We're gonna talk about the why a little bit. Right after this commercial, we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Right before the commercial, we were talking about the why. Tiffany, you came into sterile processing because of one of those whys. Stephanie alluded to, hey, we're here to make sure that you don't get, said surgical site infections and stuff like that. Can you elaborate for the people just how that journey shaped and molded you to where you're at right now?
I would say my brother is the why for me, because he was born with cerebral palsy, so he was already immunocompromised. And when he went in to get his surgery, I was well versed with me and my mom, but my mom was a retired nurse for 30 years. So we were well versed on, medical terminology, recovery, all of that. And when they gave me all the information, I was the family on the other side. So I understand how it feels to be on the other side. So when my brother went in for surgery, everything was fine. And then we noticed he ran a fever. We started seeing some type of abscess near the site when we were doing wound care. And then he almost got sepsis really fast because of him having cerebral palsy. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, what happened? The case was delayed. He didn't get into the OR until set time. And then when we kept asking, no one was updating us. So we were just sitting there like, we just thought the worst. And it really wasn't worse, thank God, that he recovered. But it was just the fact of why? Like, why did this happen? I mean, did they not care enough? Did they not make sure they take extra precaution? So it made me a little angry because I didn't really know where to pinpoint it from. And I'm speaking from my family members, point of view of recovery. But I felt like, well, did someone use a dirty instrument? Did something happen during surgery? I mean, did someone carelessly just didn't really make sure, check their steps? So when I got into central processing, I'm like, okay, how you get instruments sterile to be used on the sterile field? So that's what got me thinking, like, well, maybe it was a dirty instrument that was used, and whatever was on that instrument got into my brother and caused an infection. So when I actually started reading the standards and I got certified and everything, that's when I started noticing that it is so essential not to skip no steps for infection. That's when I was like, okay, so now I know what I need to do to make sure the next person that's on the table is a family member, friend that do not have a surgical site infection, and make sure they have the best sterility, integrity tray or whatever service I can give them, because I don't want family to see or, you know, have their family die of an infection where they were in recovery, but then the infection was really bad to where they didn't recover from it. So that's my why. That's my why I am really am passionate in central processing.
A beautiful story there, and we appreciate you wanting to know the why and coming aboard, and now a great member of the sterile processing family. But that goes back to what Stephanie said. She said, "Hey, I turned it around and asked the person, hey, would you want that used on a family member?" And it's not. I would say it's sad that we have to use that analogy, but people tend to get that. Like, it makes it personable then, and then they're like, oh no, let's just send it back through the wash, or let me recheck that. And that's the why from like I get. So Stephanie, you get this report that says, hey, we had, this many infections or this many of this. So is that the point where you go back and you say, hey, we need to evaluate said processes? And that's when you come together with the SPD people to find out what is actually happening?
Yeah, absolutely. We've identified a few things here and there where you have certain types of cases. And that's when you kind of dive into maybe a specific instrument. Is it a screw that's not being removed during reprocessing? Is there something that they're missing on one of the important steps? Sometimes some of the more complicated SPD items tend to cause more infections, and it's because of simple, things that are missed along the way. So we actually have gone down before, sat with SPD staff, gone through like the intricacies of each device, and tried to look into more of what we missed or didn't miss. It's not always the instruments. Sometimes it's the surgeon or something else. But we have to dig and go into SPD to look at those things.
I think that's the part that people needed to hear. It's not that y'all coming in there to look at one particular person to say you did something wrong. It could have been the tray itself. It could have, like you said, it could have been the surgeon, or it could have been somebody in the room upstairs. But all of those metrics together, trace the back, you get to try to get the root cause of what happened. So family, IP is not there picking on you. They're actually doing, some investigative behind the scenes. Hey, what type of surgery was it? What type of tray was it? Who was in the room? And yes, we do have to evaluate the processes. And I think that is the part that you're not there looking at somebody specific. You're there saying, hey, we know the process. Let's make sure that the process is being followed. Yeah. I think that's the part that's missing. I think that people, and it's everybody, somebody walks into the SPD and everybody automatically thinks somebody's watching them. So I think that's the part where we have to get out of that mindset. Like, you're watching processes, and from that process, you get to make up the policies, the procedures, and that's what we're following based on your observations and your research.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, scopes are a prime example. You would think sometimes it's the reprocessing of how it's done caused the infection, but with like ERCP scopes, it's actually the design that was flawed. Yes. The design of the elevator was flawed. And when you look back at it, yeah, it's hard to reprocess, and it does make it difficult, and people were missing steps. But the companies themselves have identified that elevator mechanism is a flaw in a design. And that's why they've gone to disposable ERCPs, disposable pieces on ERCPs, flushing devices that go to the bottom of ERCPs. So they've had to redevelop the way they do it, not necessarily because of an SPD issue, but because of how hard it was to clean.
And that's part of the research as well. Like, even when it comes down to scopes, it's putting into best practice the ways we clean, or making sure, hey, we're following SGNA, we're following ST90, we're following ST79, we're following all these things But to tie it all together, we have the infection control piece to say, did you do ABC to make sure that all steps are followed? So I think that's where that part of the equation was missing for everybody, or some of the people that was like, hey, why is IEP, how's IT, how's infection control tied to this, and what are they looking for? So that part. Oh, we got another comment here that says, I've had family on the table too, but was confident in their fellow staff that was comfortable of any set they needed to use, but it's also their motivation. So that's why as a lead, I'm strict on following procedures. It could be mine or yours or anybody's brother, father, mother, family member. You never know, but it would never be my set that caused the harm. And that's the way I feel too. You take pride in what you're doing for you. It doesn't matter if it's my family, your family, we're all family, but every set. And I think that's what got me. One time I was at a facility as a traveler, and I heard one of the people say, I want to do my own people's set. I want to do my own family members' trays. And I'm sitting here like, from a traveler listening, like, so you don't trust your people around you to do the trays for your family. So how am I supposed to trust you to do the trays for my family? So, and it's sad that you also hear people say, well, I won't get surgery where I work. You hear that, and then that makes you think about things like that. So yeah, we got to try to change that mindset. And I think, like I said, the partnership, which is part of this village. So we have the IP part that works hand in hand with SPD, who works hand in hand with facilities, who works hand in hand with biomed. And of course, we have to have the buy-in from the C-suite. So when you go to some of the meetings and you're presenting, Stephanie, from a totality, how do they receive what your reports, and how do they look at that from, oh, do we have to spend more money? Do we have to buy something else? Because when you're implementing something, is it well received, I should say?
I would say at our facility, at least, we get a lot of support, and it is well received. One of the things, it's funny, in our board meetings, the first things they always ask us are, and they do say, I have to get a scope next month. How's that going? And it's funny, they want to know how the scopes are going, or how surgeries are going. What is your SSI rate? I have to come here next month. So I feel like they're really receptive. And I would hope that every facility is really receptive and finds the importance in it, because it is so intricate, and the things that you do, here are these surgeons who do these crazy surgeries, and they work really hard and they want things to be perfect, but they're not going to get there if they don't have what they need from SPD.
Right.
So, and I think they know too at our facility that, it's either you're with SPD or you're not. I mean, we had an event this week where we had some humidity issues, and, I partnered with SPD, and they relied on us a little bit to say, we don't feel comfortable. Don't you think we should reprocess? And, we were like, absolutely. And we had our chief of surgery thank SPD for all the hard work they did to get everything done so he could have cases the next day.
That's excellent. I like that. Ms. Sarah Vincent says infection prevention are some of her favorite partners. So some of us, like I said, some of us are actually happy that y'all are so involved, because you say it is our backup to, hey, this is why we do this. So I think that is the one part that I think, like I said, we have to get people out of that mindset of you're there watching them, you're there, spying on them, you're the enemy. We're all on one team for the same purpose and goal, and that's where we're trying to strive to get everybody involved with the infection prevention. And I would say this: I had the pleasure of sitting and seeing Stephanie on a panel full of SPD people. She was our only infection control person there, and her input was invaluable in a room full of SPD people. So that's the level where you can say, oh, she said, I'm at the sink. I've been in the sink. I've actually put together trays. I've done clean scopes, where you can't get a lot of people to say they've done that. And that's the part that I think at the end, you're like, okay, she knows a little bit about what she's talking about. We got to make sure we're paying attention here. like she's been in the sink. She mentioned it now. You got to have enough water that's under the water. You know how long the scope is. So, we know she's throwing it out there. I got you, Stephanie. I see what you're doing there. I see what you're doing there. So, in totality, again, Tiffany, with your infection control, we're going to talk about your specific right now. Do y'all meet on a regular basis to go over any of the policies or any of the procedures, or how do you bring them into your village to make sure that y'all are on the same page?
So what I try to do as a tech, I try to give suggestions and be like, can we have a quarterly meeting? Can we have the minutes that was spoken about, or do they have any new suggestions? Do they have any new findings? Because what happens is that when you don't ask them questions and then you just rely on them to give us the information, it's not really explained in a certain way. It's kind of like, well, this is what we found and this is what we're going to do. But getting all the information and the details to where you have the director in place, and then you have the clinical educator in place, and then they call a meeting, or we have a huddle and say, hey, listen, this is what's going on. We're going to take our time and we're going to slowly digest, and we're going to get better. Kind of encourage everyone to say, hey, you know what? Hey, we did drop the ball. They did find some things, but we're going to improve. We're going to do better. And I think having true exposure and being very honest and open is what actually brings everyone together. Because if you keep hiding stuff, and then SPD is in the dark, and then you come up with something that's like, well, could we at least know the process, or can we be the progress? Can we go with it? So I feel, and I'm thankful for her saying that she knows how it is to be struggled with. You got to be so deep, you got to bend over, or she understands how many steps it is, to process the scope from beginning to end. So having that side to integrate with us and for us to know what we can do better is really good to have that exposure, that honesty.
All right, so I'm gonna start some stuff now, though. I'm gonna bring up something that's a hot topic. It's a hot topic, and from an infection control standpoint, I just want to know, what do you think of one tray?
One tray, I feel like if the IFUs are followed, it's fine. The only thing is that you have to have the IUSS log to make sure you're actually logging in how many times you flash. The issue is that sometimes when they use it, some people don't log. They'd be like, oh, I'm gonna log it later. I got so much going on, and they just like, I've seen it pushed to the side, or they don't use the lock that's actually required in that tray. I've seen it to where if I go and I say, well, where's the lock for that tray? Did you use the lock, or was it in a rush? You know what I'm saying? So it's based on the hospital policies and how they're followed, and also still following the IFU for that specific tray. I've seen people flash in a pill pouch, and you see a pocket of water in the corner, and I'm like, we not using that. I'm not letting that go. You already know me. They call me Amy. Stop. No, we're not doing that. It's kind of like, I think I'm infection control because I see it, and it's like, how is that sterile to get on a field and you have a pocket of water, you have a wet pack, even though it's
okay.
Fresh, you know what I'm saying? So
Stephanie, same question. I know one tray is out there, we're using them, people, but like Tiffany said, there has to be specific steps and stuff that are followed to use them. Have you read into that with your SPD as far as the actual use of the tray, or have they contacted y'all about the infection control part of using a one tray?
And that's using the flash sterilization. So, right?
Okay, say flash.
They actually have to report all those metrics at our infection control committee. So they have to be able to speak to it at our committee. It is reported at our committees, how often they do it. So that's part of our report. That is a standing agenda item. I mean, not great, but we don't do it too often. Okay.
So they don't use the one tray as often as some people. I see some people use them every single day. So when something comes in of that nature, like a one tray that has, their own system, they say, so, IUSS system is no longer considered flash and so on and so forth. And they bring this to y'all and say, hey, we want to potentially use this. what kind of thought process goes into saying, hey, okay, let us see I know y'all get the IFU, y'all read it and say this is acceptable, not acceptable, but I know you say they report these out at your meetings, but what does that process look like when there's vetting something new of that type? That's going to change the game, as they say. It's no longer a flash. This is IUSS. It's a special tray. Yes, it's going to have water in the bottom, but it's safe. We're good. Whereas they're thinking is if a tray's wet, it's wet. So how did you have to look at that from your standpoint?
I'm not on board with it. I think reviewing IFUs is one of the most important things. Obviously, a lot of IFUs are put in place because they've gone through scientific testing. I know that there's evidence behind it. I will say our facility has not jumped on that bandwagon for the one tray part as much. So I don't see it. So I can't really speak too much to it.
Okay. That's fair. So real quick, we're going to jump into another commercial. And when we come back, get right back to it. This is getting exciting. I like it. Thank you again. One more commercial. We'll be right back. For everybody, hey, if you don't have your scrub ball ticket yet, make sure you grab your scrub ball ticket. It's going to be a great time. Hey, I'm already packed. I'm ready already. So just getting back to what we were talking about, different metrics, different thought processes. And again, here's one from Sharon here. It says, one tray has the IFUs that allows it to be safely used. The question that came up is the water sterile? Because you have to use one tray within a certain amount of time. Are we correct? So I can speak to, from what I know, there is a 48-hour time limit for a one tray, then it has to be broken back down. That's the way my facility does it. That's the metric we follow, 48 hours. Now I have known some places say, hey, they told us it could sit on the shelf for 365. But what do you follow? Based on what the rep says, or as she said, Stephanie said, hey, what does the IFU say? So Tiffany, what have you seen it? Do y'all have a time frame when y'all use a one tray, or how does that work for y'all?
So for our facility, what it is that once that tray is used, or let's just say if they don't use it, or let's just say they don't need it anymore, it's automatically broken down. It's not, sitting there, waiting to be used. So let's just say if, the surgery is finished and let's just say they didn't really need it, or, or they just have it as a backup. As soon as it's done and the back table and the mail stand is broken down, it's taken down and it's reprocessed. It's not stored.
So is that the policy that y'all have, or that's just y'all doing it that way?
No, that's the actual policy, because you don't want to, they didn't want to risk the of it sitting there and actually not complying with the IFUs. Meaning that it's just sitting there kind of like marinating. So they just didn't want nothing to happen or potentially happen in that sense. So if we're not using it, break it down and reprocess it all over again.
Stephanie, from your standpoint, is that such a thing as, or would it be such a thing as that sterile water in the bottom of an IUSS tray?
I mean, when you think about some of the organisms, you talk comes from water, AFE comes from water. I think I need to do a little more research on it and kind of learn about it, because you have a lot of waterborne pathogens, and I know you're sterilizing it and it is becoming sterile, but at what point, are we going to start to grow things? I don't know. So maybe that's something that, I need to look into a little more, but there are a lot of waterborne pathogens. So that's always a concern. I am interested to know more about it.
Oh, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. Because again, people talk about the sterile water, and like Sharon was absolutely right. Is it sterile? Is it not sterile? That's a question for, like I said, we're gonna let IP do their research and come back and tell us. Is it sterile water inside of the one tray? uh, it said an opponent of one tray asked me if I would eat from a fork that has been sitting in water for 2 days. Right? Is that the same concept, right? Trey's been Trey's been sitting there 2 days with the sterile water in the bottom. Is it still sterile after 2 days? Thought provoking. Like she said, all these waterborne pathogens. You're like, you know what? I'm just gonna open that tray and reprocess it.
I rather cover my bases. Just
yeah, it's hard too to think about it, because if you have an event related, thing where you have humidity, the pack is sterile inside, but water forms in it, you're told to reprocess it. I mean, that's exactly what happened to us. We saw humidity, water in the pack is sterile. It was going to be used that day, but it's still event related, so you still reprocess it. So, I mean, that's the kind of conversation that you want to think about when you have stuff like that.
She said that she had no comeback for the answer, so she grabbed her imaginary tea and started sipping. I think I would have had to sip some tea on that one too. Like, so my fork has been sitting in water for 2 days. Do I think it's safe to still use it? Yeah, I'm a walk away from that one as well. So, just on that kind of note, there, the partnership. We talk about the partnership and the village and the partnership. Got one more. It said, wouldn't the evaporated water be the same water that comes from the washer, so that if the water is safe to use, then the steam wouldn't be the same? Wouldn't it be the same? So if the water from the washer and the water from the steam, and is the evaporated water the same as the same water, would it be still safe to use? These are all thought-provoking questions. If you use the same water lines and the steam is the same water from the washer, but yet you just heated this one up and it's sitting in the bottom of the tray and now it's evaporated, is it still safe to use?
You want to take this one, or you want me to go?
I think it's the same thing though. If you have a sterile instrument that, like I said, humidity, there's moisture in the package, would you use something that had moisture on an instrument that just happened that day on a patient? I mean, I wouldn't. You're always taught to reprocess it. It's event related.
We're taught to reprocess it. So, Tiffany, if the tray's sitting there, it's evaporated water now. It's not still sitting in the bottom condensed. It's evaporated out the tray. Is it still safe?
It's the same concept as if, with the one tray, you're still getting your 4 minutes of sterilization parameters. But that's
what they just said, yes.
Yeah, but the only difference is that, the dry time, because, you need it, instantly. Right. But it's still the same concept, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like, if it's moisture in there and it dries on the instrument, it's still the same concept of knowing the instrument is wet on the field. It's the same concept where you just don't know. So if you just don't know, why take a chance? That's just my opinion. So if that 48-hour rule, or you say, like I said, in your case, if they don't use it that moment during that case, then y'all reprocess anyway. Right. Y'all don't even wait the 48 hours. Y'all just go ahead and reprocess. Right. Because then what happens is that, let's just say if something adheres to it, because you don't know what's actually incubating in there. So what if you have something like a biofilm or something sticking to it, and then let's say to do a culture swab and they find something, and then you do a root cause analysis to come back from the tray, it was sitting there. Okay. That's a rationale you can have as well. That's a very fair assessment. So if you did the root cause, or you say, hey, something from the one tray because of the culture and all that stuff, something from the one tray was the cause of, so then you would have to look at that process either way. Hey, are we opening? Are we not using? Are we reprocessing immediately? So I get that part of it. So yeah, all thought provoking. People have real questions about it, because it has been a hot topic for however long now, that the one tray, we're getting rid of flash.
we're getting this a new IUSS, we can do this. Yes, as long as you're documenting and you set your time parameters and all of this stuff, and the infection control says, hey, you know what? As long as you do all of these things, it's safe to use. That's where we were stuck at. Like, so what is safe to use? What is safe to use at this point? And, I think all that insight is good. Hey, real quick, I got to jump in one more commercial and then we'll be right back at it. Again, big shout out, Calzura. Look at that. You see it. It's right there. And we also have our very brand new Rebel that just came out. We have the Classic and we have the Rebel. Make sure you go check them out. Only shoe that can be thermally disinfected. And like I said, it has an IFU on one source that you can look up and you can prove the infection control. Hey, my shoe has been sterilized, and let and let them tell you about that. Like, hey, she said as long as we got the IFU is out there. So hey, no questions there. Again, I like how we're tying all this together, even down to, like I said, from the process of them walking in to even something as simple but not simple as a one tray, the collaboration between infection control, the sterile processing department, and bringing it together. Just to recap the whole thing, we're saying, hey, this is not an attack on an individual. This is us evaluating processes. This is us evaluating the policy, just making sure that the procedures that y'all are doing are correct. And that's where the partnership should be strengthened at, is because that assessments that you're doing all goes back to the common goal that we have, is keeping the patients and the staff safe. So when they're coming to the SPD director or manager and say, hey, I just did my walkthrough, did my rounds, and said person didn't have on the right PPE, or I found this tray out here, or all the locks were locked and it just came out of the washer. Those are quality metrics that they have to report on. It's not getting somebody in trouble, it's keeping people safe. And I think that's, like I said, I think that part is the part that's always missing. When people just randomly show up in your department, everybody gets nervous. Like, it's not just one person. Like, when somebody randomly shows up, like, wait, what are they doing? why is she putting on the bunny suit? Hold on. What is she looking for? But from the standpoint of, like Stephanie said, I've been in the sink. I've had my hands in the sink. I've put on the PPE. I've sweated, so I know what you're supposed to have on. I know how the instrument's supposed to go in the washer. I know how they're supposed to come out on the other side. I even know how you're supposed to wrap it. How can you dispute the facts coming from somebody who's actually done it? And that's where I said the misconnection was, is like when you get somebody who hasn't been well versed, like a Stephanie saying, hey, no, you did that wrong. Like, how do you know? I'm certified. Like, I'm qualified to be over here doing this, and you're telling me I'm doing something wrong. So I think that is the part that when you're building your village, and I even, like I said, down to my C-suite, I've had my C-suite come put on bunny suits and walk through the process so that they can understand what we're doing, what's happening, so that when we're speaking in huddles, as Stephanie said, when we report out these metrics every month and say, hey, I've had no positive BIs, I've had, no IUSS for however said many cases, and they have this metric, that people understand like what that means. So getting everybody involved, knowing who's in your village. I think that's the main point of, I highlighted infection control today for the obvious reason. We wanted to make sure patients are safe. We want to make sure that the staff is safe, but who else makes sure that everybody's safe? We have to make sure we have working equipment. So that's where your biomeds and all of them come in at. You got to make sure you have the stuff that you need in a timely fashion. So your purchasing, your facilities, all these people make up your village. Are you utilizing your village? I think that's the key point of, do you know who's in your village? Do you know who the person is that you need to call when something goes wrong, or when you need something? Do you know who to call? I think that is more of where we want to focus our efforts, not attack. We're being attacked, not like they're picking on me. Like, why is infection control here again? Like, why is she always walking through? Somebody tell her stop. No, we need her partnership on this, because the more eyes, the better. Even down to like the hand washing. If you see somebody not hand washing or not utilizing the right steps and stuff, hey, infection control, can you come over here? We need to in-service something. You call everybody, hey, they need an in-service on how to wash their hands, how to use hand sanitizer, because this is not working. Because I don't want to be the person that gets dinged on that kind of stuff. And that's where that partnership again comes in at. Okay, it's back to, see, we got this one trait thing, got people talking. It said, we run a biological with every load, but I agree with reprocessing it if it's not used right after that case. So, and I think that's what we put in place as well. I don't really want to wait the 48 hours. If they don't use it, then I say pop it, go ahead, put it back in this regular container, reprocess it, and make it so that it's good. Sarah says that monthly and quarterly rounding or audits are great outside eyes to have on process improvement. Process versus people. Don't take it personal. IP are here to help. I think that summed up everything that we've been saying, is that at the end of the day, they are here for the same reason you're here, and that's to make sure that we're running smoothly, make sure that we are running effectively, and it's not personal at all. It's definitely not a personal attack by any means. Stephanie, for the team, for the people watching, do you have any of those IP great words of wisdom to impart upon us before we go?
I don't have anything too deep, but I would say develop those relationships. You never know where it's going to take you. When I first started developing our SPD relationship, I found out, it was hard for them to see because the lights weren't bright enough and some, little things. So I had their lights upgraded to LED lights. I got them new lights at their stations. We had it repainted. We painted it a bright blue to make it a little happier environment. So you never know what kind of relationship you're going to build unless you try to build one. So I think just be open to the partnerships and be receptive and try to engage them too. Make them talk to you. Make some nervous.
So don't make them nervous. We can't make them nervous. They won't talk to you then. Tiffany, same question. What can you say to people who are, like she says, who's trying to build those relationships and who's trying to establish their village? What words would you say to that tech or that manager? How do you engage to make sure that happens?
Get to know your staff and their mindset. Get to know where they currently are, and be open to embrace change, because we all know it's hard, and there's always a culture where you have to break it to where you want to do better, but then at the end of the day we know it's a process. But if you embrace it and you take the time to communicate and get to know people and get to know their purpose and their why, it would be an easier journey to when we all grow together collectively. It will all be good for the end result, which is the patient.
Hey, I couldn't have said it better myself. I thank you, Stephanie. I thank you, Tiffany, for coming on and us enlightening people to, hey, when people are walking through or you're trying to establish your village, it's the listening, it's the why. Understanding the why behind it's important to make sure that those relationships are fostered. And as Stephanie said, she helped get new lights. They got painting just based on recommendations from an IP perspective. You never know where that would take you down the road. So again, family, it's been time to talk. We're talking about who's in your village. We highlighted infection control, but there are many more pieces to the puzzle. Get to know them, as Tiffany said, know who those people are, build those relationships, and let's make it so that we can all be there for the patient and be there for each other. I'm your favorite nephew. I'll see you again next Thursday. Time to talk. I thank you. Thank Calzura. Thank Knowledge and Nonsense. We love you all, and I'll see you again soon. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.